Shalom, party people, and welcome to the 12th C. We're in the miscellaneous section of the abomination spreadsheet study. How this kind of plays out. This miscellaneous section is really kind of a catch-all category that as I was going through and I was separating out different scriptures based off of, how it read and what the use of that abomination word was, there kind of came a category of I'm not entirely sure what to do with these. Now, I mean, relatively decent understanding of what the passages were saying, but they didn't nice and neat fit into one specific category by themselves. And there's a theme that you'll see throughout the spreadsheets. Uh, you will see that many of these sections touch on several different categories, which is cool. But there was just something, a je ne sais quoi, so to speak, about each of these specific passages that we're going to be looking at in a little while that they just didn't 100% nice and neat fit into some of these categories. And so that's where this miscellaneous category kind of came from. And let's just take a look at the spreadsheet real quick so that way you guys can kind of start to see a little bit of what I'm talking about here. All right, so here we are. A couple of quick things. I have a video in the description if you're curious how to access this abomination spreadsheet. It is 100% free. Uh, in the description of this is number one, the spreadsheet, which you can click on, but if you're curious and you need a walkthrough, you can just go ahead and click on the video that is right below this in the description that will show you how to access this spreadsheet. It's 100% free. Like just take it, use it, play with it, have a lot of fun. It's set up to where you can't accidentally edit and change things, but you could copy this and make your own if you wanted to. So there's four main tabs on the bottom. There's color sort, Hebrew sort, Greek sort, and raw data color code. We're in the color sort section, and there's several categories. You'll notice there's miscellaneous, and then if we scroll all the way down, there's improper worship. We get into the diet section, we get into the sexual immorality, and all of these are color coded. We have idolatry, and then we have weights and measures and character actions. So those are our main categories that we're dealing with, and we're going to focus today on the miscellaneous category, all the way up here at the top. In the far left-hand side, in the Bible book section, it will be just black with white lettering. And then over here on the side, where the colors actually start for the color code of what category it is would actually be in column K, and that's the offender, or I'm sorry, the offended category. That's something that the first color is going to help sort what's going on. There's going to be some secondary colors in column L and so forth that are going to be like, hey, this particular thing fits in multiple categories. I mean, you'll even, as we scroll down, you'll see that there are some others that will have colors like in column M, and then there are some that even go all the way out to N and so forth. And then here we go, we have one that goes all the way out to O. So you would have like primarily in this line 100, what is that, 72? 112 actually. We would have our first one where the color would be black, and then we would have um, orange, and then red, and then purple, and then green. And those are going to correspond to the first one being our miscellaneous color, which would be black. And then after that, we would have orange, which that orange is actually our next category that we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks, improper worship. And then the next color that would be in this particular line, we would have red, which would be idolatry. We would have purple, which would be sexual immorality. And then we would have green, which would be diet. So this one in particular line item is going to cover several different categories. Like I was saying earlier, the miscellaneous category just kind of has a je ne sais quoi to it that is very, very difficult to truly categorize it just in one specific category. And some of these things, it's, become a catch-all that if it didn't fit in one of the main categories that I did, it would just go ahead and go in the miscellaneous category. Some of these, it touches on so many, but there's just an undertone of something that doesn't quite fit in the others that, it may touch on those others, it may touch on diet, it may touch on idol worship, it may touch on sexual immorality, it may, touch on something else. But in general, it lands in kind of a miscellaneous category. In all of these categories, though, you'll actually see that some of these things repeat. So if it does have multiple colors, it will also be addressed in the other sections down below. That caveat aside, there's going to be some main passages that we look at. And those are going to be these ones where it's going to be this light blue here in columns D, E, and F. Those columns are the translations for King James Scriptures 2009 and ESV. Those are the main translations that I really consulted for the spreadsheet. And when we have one that comes up as an abomination in one or all three of those translations, then when that happens, I flagged it and it will be light blue. You'll notice there's way more scriptures in here than we're going to touch today, and that's just part of it. What's going on with this is every time that I have seen a particular Greek or Hebrew word that theoretically could be translated abomination, uh, it could be translated something else, but theoretically, under a certain set of circumstances, could it be translated abomination? I have gone ahead and categorized it. And you'll notice that there's a whole lot that are, just going to be translated as like stink or iniquity or unclean, a whole lot of uncleans or uncleanliness, defiled, those kind of things. Those words specifically were chosen by the translators, and depending on the context of what's going on, it doesn't always necessarily come across as abomination. But you may get certain situations where all of these translations that I've consulted agree, like, hey, this word is abomination. And sometimes they're just choosing different words to convey the same general tone. And other times they are, intentional, like, hey, this should stand out to you. Today we're just going to review the ones that are specifically translated abomination that have landed in this miscellaneous category. But in general, I want you to be able to take this spreadsheet and use this for your own deep study. And even if you come to slightly different conclusions than what I come to, I just hope that this is a good resource. All right, back up top. So I've got another video where I'm reading all of the abomination scriptures in one go, and that's down in the description if you want to just listen to me ramble and ramble, just straight out of scripture of this is what Yahweh has to say about abominations. But we're going to focus on the miscellaneous category, and I've got, about seven, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I've got seven, short passages that we're going to read. And that previous video where I was just reading everything out of there, I didn't really provide any commentary. And the deeper dives of this, I want to, kind of piece through some of these a little bit. And I would love to hear your thoughts on these passages down in the description or down in the comments below. But this is really just kind of more of an open discussion, and we'll just kind of do this dance a little bit. But first kind of real miscellaneous verse that we're dealing with is Genesis 43:32. And I'm going to jump up just a little bit. I'm going to start in verse 30. So Genesis 43, I'm in verse 30. Then Joseph hurried out from his compassion, grew warm for his brothers, and he sought a place to weep, and he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, serve the food. And they served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table by Benjamin's portion. But Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any other's, and they drank and were merry with him. So the word that's used for abomination in verse 32 is H8441 or G946. Very, very common use of abomination. And the general takeaway that we should have from this is that like the sense of disgust or like quite literal, like your nose is wrinkling, like just ugh, that is the sense that most often comes across when we're dealing with abomination. And basically, a little bit of background, what's going on here is that Joseph, he's in Egypt and he is, incognito, and he's, number 2 in the kingdom. Uh, and his brothers have come not knowing who he is, and they're seeking out food for what's going on. And Joseph has had this, slight break in like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that my brothers are really changing who they are. And so he sits them down to have dinner. And the custom for the Egyptians is they will not eat with the Hebrews. And so there's 2 separate tables going on. There's one table for the Egyptians, which Joseph is at because by all accounts, Joseph is effectively Egyptian now because he has, risen up the ranks and he's number 2, and he was a slave and all the way up to now, basically VP of Egypt. Uh, and his brothers being sheep herders, being goat herders, being desert dwellers, being um, yucky, disgusting people who are not well kept, who, what's their hygiene levels like, who knows, not to the Egyptian standards at least, because, the Egyptians were doing just a whole bunch of stuff. They wanted that distinct separation between the Egyptians and between the Hebrews. And this wasn't the Hebrews who wanted the separation from, they didn't want the Hebrews didn't want the separation away from the Egyptians. The Egyptians wanted the separation from the Hebrews, wanted the separation from the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 sons of Israel. Um, interesting, interesting tidbit. We see later in the book of Acts where the Hebrews don't want to eat, or the Jews don't want to eat with the Gentiles, and that's something that you may see a little bit of a parallel there. But specifically in this, uh, the Egyptians find the Hebrews disgusting, and it's like we won't eat with them. Uh, and so it's one table over here, one table over here, and Joseph is sending choice portions from his table to his brothers, who they don't know that he's their brother, but they just think, okay, he is, blessing us with this because, for whatever reason, we're impressing the guy. He keeps giving us his gold and his silver, and we keep bringing it back. So he sees our honesty. Maybe he's trying to reward that. I don't know. Um, but the fact of the matter is that they have come back to Egypt, and they're he arranges them in birth order, and they're like, oh my gosh, like this must be, a sign. He's arranging us in our birth order. Like, what's going on? But he is giving 5 times the choice portions to his biological, same father, same mother, brother, Benjamin. Uh, Whereas all of his other half brothers are, just they're in their normal birth order, but they're getting, standard portions. And you would normally see a double portion going to firstborn or whoever has firstborn status, because we do have a little bit of a dynamic here. Whereas I believe it's Reuben who's the true firstborn, but Judah who has taken that birthright. So there's some dynamics that's going on in here. The key takeaway for our purposes of what we're getting into is that the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. Uh, so the Egyptians find the Hebrews disgusting. And that is of note. Like I said, you know, flash forward into Acts, you see the, oh, hey, it's, they'll say unlawful, and it's nothing in the Torah that says that. It is their custom that they have built, that, the Jews won't eat with outsiders. Um, there's nothing in the Torah that says that. This would be one of the closest verses that someone could argue for that. And I would say that there is some level of a foreshadowing or a parallel in that, but never a, you're banned from doing this. And it's interesting that the Egyptians find the Hebrews disgusting, almost as if the Hebrews are set apart. Take with that what you will. Um, a couple of verses forward, Genesis 46, 34 is what we're going to focus on, but I'm just going to, for context, I'm going to jump up a couple of verses. Um, I will go, no, I'll start in 28. So Genesis 46, 28, and we're going to end at the end of verse 34. And he had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen, and Joseph prepared his chariots and went to meet Israel his father in Goshen. And he presented himself to him, and fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face, and know that you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me, and the men are shepherds. For they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every sheepherder is an abomination to the Egyptians. And that same word for abominations is going to be Strong's H8441 and G946. So same word, whether it's in the Septuagint or in the Masoretic text. It's going to come across that same way as that previous reference. So we're a few chapters forward. Joseph's secret is out. They know who he is. They've had this big long debacle, and they have arranged for Israel in his old age, Jacob in his old age, to come to Egypt to bring the whole family, all 75 of them, that plus servants and everybody else who's there. Down to Egypt, and they're going to relatively permanently settle there, at least in the land of Goshen for, the next, depending on, whatever the debates that you cite in on that. I subscribe to the 215-year theory, but there's a lot of people who are in that 400 to 430-year camp, and that's a sidebar issue on how you interpret one or two particular verses in the book of Genesis. But in general, regardless of how much longer that they're going to be in Goshen, it's, for their family, for, the next several generations, it is a relatively permanent settling that's going on here in Egypt. And Joseph is prepping his brothers. He's like, hey, we're gonna go to Pharaoh, and you need to tell him, hey, we keep livestock, and specifically sheep. And Pharaoh is basically gonna give us Goshen because he doesn't want us in his backyard because we keep sheep. And what we know from the previous verse, or the previous verses that we were reading, that the Egyptians find the Hebrews disgusting. Um, they find them an abomination. In that, uh, we get just a little bit more text clarity as to what's going on. It's not just a hygiene thing that, they're not as civilized as us. They're not as Bradley Uppercrust the Third. Bonus points if you know what movie that is. In that, it's specifically that they keep livestock, specifically sheep, that is such an abomination to the Egyptians. Now, we can go into a huge tangent in all of this. There is some chatter, I guess, online as to what was going on in Egypt specifically at this time, and that plays into how you see timelines as to what's going on in Egyptology at the time, and that a lot of it is like, okay, well, what specific year were they down in Egypt for this? Um, but what plays into it is a deity that the Egyptians were at least starting to chase after, if not having relatively well established by this point, was a deity that was either sheep or goat based, or one of this particular deity's forms was either sheep or goat based. And so the fact that these people were raising sheep or goats for slaughter, for harvesting their pelts, for eating them, for basically what the Egyptians viewed as exploitation of these animals. Um, a theory, some chatter, however you want to see it, is that the Egyptians didn't care for this particular practice. Um, I don't know. The comparison that you'll see is that this would be like going to India, and slaughtering a cow. Um, maybe, maybe. It's possible that when we get in, the next few verses, when we jump into Exodus, that plays a little bit more into it. But at minimum, um, that could have been an underlying factor. But it really seems to be that they didn't want these guys in their backyard, probably because it's like, hey man, you smell like lamb grease. You stink. Like there's flies going on everywhere. We don't like the smell of the dew on your sheep's wool in the morning. It seems to be more of that and less of like this is specifically offensive to us that you are, raising sheep. It's more of like we think the fact that you raise sheep is disgusting. Um, is more in line of what's actually going on. Um, that said, you shall say to your servant, your servants have been keepers of livestock from your youth, or from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that we may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every sheep herder is an abomination to the Egyptians. And I would say it's that the Egyptians find herding sheep disgusting. It's like we have our own thing. Um, that's more of the interpretation that I lean on this, but I'm open to the possibility of the Egyptian sheep or goat deity was hard set in that time, like maybe I don't know. I think, and we'll jump to Exodus, um, Exodus 8:26. So this is several generations later, debate aside of, is this 400 years later or is this, 215 years later? Um, Whatever. Doesn't really matter for the purposes of this discussion. But Exodus chapter 8, I'm going to verse 25 and I'll read, a little bit. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses said, it would not be right to do so, for the offerings that we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you must not go very far away. Plead for me. So the dialogue continues, but for what we're focusing on today, we're four-ish, three, 4 plagues deep. It looks like we've got, yeah, we're 4 plagues deep. Flies have already come through Egypt. We've had gnats come through. We've had frogs come through, and we have had the Nile turn to blood. So Pharaoh has seen some things go on. There's some things that the magicians can, emulate. There are other things that are, beginning to set into where, Yahweh is more powerful than what these, Egyptian magicians are able to do. And so in that, uh, Pharaoh and Moses are having a dialogue, and it's like, hey, you said that you guys are, wanting to hold this festival to your God, or, whatever. Why don't you just do it here? Like everybody else this year, like you could just do it here, it'll be fine. And then, I'll give you a couple of days off and then we can just get back to this thing, that's going on. And Moses is like, no, we can't. We can't do that. if we were to sacrifice to Yahweh here, the Egyptians would kill us because we are going to be sacrificing lambs to Yahweh. And the Egyptians will not have us do that. Like they hate that we are going to do that and they'll kill us. Like we no go. So I would say in this section, um, it is much more probable that the sheep or the goat deity that the Egyptians possibly were worshiping um, is much more set in at this time because we have progressed from the Hebrews are disgusting, like ew, to we don't want them in our backyards. We won't eat with them. We don't want them in their backyards too. We outright hate their religious practices. So there's kind of a progression that you see in this, going from, you know, early in Joseph's, stuff going on to them settling to now, a couple hundred to several hundred years in the future. And there is more of a stronghold development of a, outright hatred for the Hebrews and what's going on in Egypt. And Moses rightfully points out to Pharaoh, is like, hey, you know, even if we did it here, we couldn't because the Egyptians would kill us. And so that's a no-go. Like this is completely offensive to your people, and we won't have it. So we need to go 3 days journey into the wilderness to do what Yahweh is commanding us to do. That context for 2 times we see an abomination, both of those times in this verse. In verse 26, it comes up H8441 and G946. Same reference, connotation is getting a little bit heavier in it, that Egypt is disgusted by what the Hebrews are doing or trying to do or want to do. And they want that true hard and fast separation in what's there. In that, we see really, really deep lines of just, hey, you guys have got to stop what you're doing. We will not have part of this. We do not want you here. Ugh. A disgust that is there. These 3 references are relatively unique in that, like you can group them together, which is fine, but they still are more miscellaneous in that. There are some food connotations in there, which some of these play into, but it is Egypt being disgusted with Israel, and that's kind of why this has gone in the miscellaneous category for me. Like, could we put them in the food category, and do they touch on the food categories? Yeah, sure they do. But the contexts that we gather from this is that, and they're the first references that we have for abominations in Scripture, uh, is that the abomination, whatever it is something that disgusts. So, and with the power of editing, we're back. So, Numbers 11:20. Let's see. Let's actually go verse 18. Numbers chapter 11. I'm going to start in verse 18. And say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat, for you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? For it was better for us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not eat just 1 day or 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome. And in the scriptures, it actually translates that loathsome as abominable to you, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and have wept before him, saying, why did we come out of Egypt? But Moses said, the people among whom I am numbered 600,000 on foot, and you have said, I will give them meat, that they may eat a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them, and be enough for them, or shall it all be fish in the sea and gathered together for them and be enough for them? And the Lord said to Moses, is the Lord's hand shortened Now you shall see whether my word will come true or not. So Israel is in the wilderness and they're complaining, hey, we want meat. We're tired of eating this manna, which, bread from heaven. You're outright tired of eating what Yahweh has provided for you. Like, how often are we that ungrateful? Like, he has blessed us with so many things, and then we complain, well, why can't I have this? Why can whatever? How often are we like that, where we truly complain about the things that he has blessed us with? Fine. You want meat? You've been asking for it. I'm going to give you so much meat that it's literally coming out of your nose. And it's in the form of quail that he gives it to them. And they have a whole month's worth, to the point where they are supposed to be eating so much of this that they are sick of it or get sick because of it. Depends on how you read the translation. The scriptures, out of the three translations that I surveyed, um, do this word as abomination, and it's a unique word. I don't really see it in any other circumstances. H2214, and the Septuagint in this is actually relatively uncertain as to what this word should be translated. So this is kind of a special case abomination, but it's like, hey, you're going to be sick of this. Like, man, we've been eating the same thing. Like, yeah, it's been pizza for the last 30 days. Like, you'd probably be getting sick of pizza at a certain point if you're having it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Um, whatever that boils down to, it still may be your favorite meal for a little while, but if it's the same thing every day for 30 days, um, fine, you're complaining with this. I'll give you exactly what you have been asking for. You will complain about that too. It's really more of how I read this, to the point where you're going to be sick and tired of this. Um, Less of like disgusting, but more of like you will turn your nose up at this. Um, that's more of how I read this one. And I don't know how much I'm truly like rubber stamping that this one should be abomination. Um, but I can see the context of like you will be get sick of this. You will turn your nose up at this too. I really almost prefer the reading of you're complaining about this. Like, I'm gonna fulfill what you're asking for so much that you'll complain about that too. I think that is um, a better grasp on the context of the passage. But that is of note. And yeah, is this a food abomination one? Yeah, it ties into it, but it's really the you're going to turn your nose up at it. A little bit of it will disgust you, but definitely like you're going to be sick and tired of this. So that is that. We are going to jump to Isaiah 14. Uh, Common passage in this one that sometimes people are going to read a lot into this, and let's get there. Um, I'm gonna do verse 13 down. Um, Isaiah 14, verse 13. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mountain of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms, who made the world like a desert, and overthrew its cities, and did not let his prisoners go home? All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb, but you are cast out away from your grave, like a loathed branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword who go down to the stones of the pit, like dead bodies trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land, you have slain your people. That loathed here in the ESV is abominable in King James and in the scriptures. And that ties in with Strong's H8581. or G946, which that reference is translated abomination in several other passages. This one in particular, there is some debate as to whether or not this is specifically just about the ruler of Babylon at the time, or if this has connotations that tie into Hasatan falling from grace. That is such an intricate conversation that is separate from what this discussion is. I can definitely see the parallels. I don't want to interject in such a point that like I'm just saying what everybody else is saying about this passage, or like trying to like bring a new spin to this one. It's just like I want to let the text say what it says, and I don't discount that this is probably deeper than just the ruler of Babylon, but Yahweh through Isaiah is specifically like condemning Babylon for this. And so face value, that's I think an appropriate way to view this text. Although there's definitely more going on here. In this, Babylon is basically getting the told what for about this. And it's like, hey bro, like you think you're, hot stuff, and you're not. You are going to be made low, brought low. Um, there are some tie-ins with other categories in this. There's definitely like all the pagan practices that Babylon's participating in that they're not supposed to be. Uh, and so, you can bring in some idol worship, idol of self worship. You can bring in improper worship. You can bring in pride. Like you can bring in some character flaws in all of this. But this one in particular, um, just specifically about a nation being dethroned, and then the possibility of the context of this applying to Hasatan as well. Um, this really just became like, even though it has other ties to, other things that are going on, this really just kind of became a miscellaneous passage for me. In that, um, despite its other connections, it's just like there is more, there is deeper, there is stuff that is here that is not just surface level. So yes, I do want to let the text say what it says, but there's just something else, and so that's why I did want to peg this one as a like, let's include this in the miscellaneous, just because there is more going on here. But you are cast out away from your grave like a loathed branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. There's there's enough going on there. So um, yeah, that has an abominable connotations, especially King James in the scriptures. Loathed branch is what they choose for ESV, which I don't think is necessarily a wrong choice, but really kind of reminds me of um, the I'm the vine, you are the branches. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Um, that it's been cut off, been cast out, and no longer has part in what Yahweh is doing. And in all of that, um, Yahweh cast him out enough, or didn't like him enough, cut him off, cast him out, threw him away. And what do we do with the branches that are thrown away? They're swept up and thrown into the fire and burned. So heavy, heavy stuff that goes on in this. It was enough. Even though you can definitely tie this into other things, it was definitely enough that it's like there's just more going on here. And so that's why miscellaneous category. Um, Ezekiel 18, and my gosh, like this whole chapter, like you need to, if you haven't recently read through all of Ezekiel 18, like you need to. Specifically, what we're dealing with here, um, there are there are two abomination sections in this, and verse 13 is the big one that just really has some extra stuff going on, and that's why I wanted to put this in. But we're going to start in verse 10, Ezekiel 18, verse 10. If he fathers a son who is violent, a shedder of blood, who does any of these things, though he himself does none of these things, who even eats upon the mountains, defiles his neighbor's wife, oppresses the poor and the needy, commits robbery, does not restore the pledge, lifts up his eyes to the idols, commits abominations, lends at interest, takes profit, shall he then live? He shall not live. He has done all of these abominations. He shall surely die. His blood shall be upon himself. So you have somebody who is partaking in some, what generally we would consider some pretty messed up stuff, where oppresses the poor, defiles his neighbor's wife. That eats upon the mountains is connotation of idol worship, that high places going off to worship other gods. So that plays in a little bit. Yeah, eats upon the mountains, defiles his neighbor's wife, oppresses the poor and the needy, commits robbery, does not restore a pledge. So he has a promise that, hey, I'm going to follow through on this, doesn't keep his promises. Or like, hey, take my cloak and, I'll give it to you. I'll give it back to you in the evening or whatever, and doesn't. So, doesn't follow through. Um, Lifts up his eyes to the idols, more idol stuff. Commits abomination. H8441 is typically going to be really tied into adultery, idol worship, fornication, those types of things. So it doesn't specify what the specific abomination is, but from the text, we already have defiles his neighbor's wife and worshiping idols. So that's, you know, pretty easy to surmise what else is going on. Is the possibility of homosexual activity going on? Maybe. I don't know. Verse 13, lends at interest. We're jumping from idol worship to, hey, here's $100. I want 120 back. Here's $100. I want 101 back. It's been 6 months since you paid me. I need more. Yahweh does not like that. Per the Torah, we are allowed to lend outside of the family. People who don't believe like us, who live far off away, we're allowed to lend to them at interest. But inside the family, it is 100% off limits. To someone who is a believer, you are not allowed to lend to them at interest. They need something here. I'll spot you the money and you pay me back whenever. And guess what? The Shemitah year rolls around in 7 years and they haven't paid you back. You're supposed to forget about it. The Shemitah year is tomorrow and your buddy needs $100. Here you go. If he pays me back, he pays me back. But if, Shemitah year's tomorrow and he needs it, here you go. Your Jubilee rolls around. I cannot go collecting that debt. It's done. Those are supposed to be the connotations of how we love our brother. When Yeshua was talking about, hey, the world will know that you're my disciples for the way that you love one another. A lot of those love one another's are spelled out in the Torah. And you're supposed to love unconditionally, specifically. And yes, it's good that we love other people who are not in the family. Like, we need to show them love. But that specific command of they will know you by your love for one another is in group love. And if we are not showing our fellow believers outright, like, everything I have is yours, what does that say? Because relatively speaking, like, somebody we see in need, like, we want to help them. But what about the people who are in need within our own circles? Are we not self-sacrificially laying down everything to make sure that they are not poor, destitute, in need for something? It plays into it. Lens at interest is a lot heavier than people realize. And the fact that Yahweh does not like it when we take advantage of people in our peer groups, in our belief circle, in the same people who believe the same way that we do, to the extent that I would say that even if they're a different denomination than you, but they still believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. They still believe that Jesus is the Christ. Okay, it doesn't matter that this dude's Catholic. He is a brother in Christ. Here you go. Take what you need, man. Like, I will help you. Here you go. What you're trying to do is righteous. Here. That should be more painful. Man, this dude who needs whatever, he's Assembly of God. He loves Christ. Here you go. And you know what? I probably shouldn't even expect it back. Here, take it. And if he pays me back, he pays me back. But it will not be one dime more than what he gave me. That plays into it. We literally went from idol worship and violating your neighbor's wife to do not charge interest. And these are neck and neck, all called abominations. Takes a prophet, shall he or shall he even live? He shall not live. He has done all of these abominations. If you just thought that the one abomination word at the tail end of 12, all of these abominations, lending and interest, is called an abomination in this chapter. And that's just what's crazy. Oppressing the poor is an abomination. Yahweh is disgusted by how we are treating other people, even in the sense that we are not taking care of those around us. There's another mention of abominations when we jump over to verse 24, and that is separate from this specific miscellaneous discussion. But I would highly recommend that you read all of Ezekiel 18. You want to see forgiveness, outright forgiveness that is Old Testament stuff. That is like, oh, that you want to see new covenant stuff smack dab in the middle of the old covenant, and you start scratching your head wondering, man, where's the difference? Because there's not a difference. Ezekiel 18 is one of these really clear passages that lines out that these covenants stack, they don't replace each other. So I would highly, highly recommend that if you haven't read Ezekiel 18 lately, that you go back and reread it, because it is a hard, hard, heavy hitting chapter. The book of Nahum, chapter 3. And this one's the last one in our series of miscellaneous abominations. I'm going to start in verse 5. Nahum 3, starting in verse 5. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts, and will lift up your skirts over your face, and I will make nations look at your nakedness, the kingdoms at your shame. I will throw filth, and that filth is translated abominable or abomination, depending on King James or the scriptures. I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. And all who look at you will shrink from you and say, wasted is Nineveh, who will grieve for her. Where shall I seek comforters for you? Are you better than Thebes, that sat at the Nile, with water around her, her rampart at sea, and water her wall? Cush was her strength. Egypt too, that without limit, Put and the Libyans were her helpers. Verse 6, I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. So specifically, Nahum, through Yahweh, is condemning Nineveh because the Assyrians are doing some crazy, crazy stuff right now. That filth, abominable or abomination, is generally considered like, hey, I'm going to throw poop on you. You are going to be lower than horse dung. Like, it's just the connotations that are playing into it. It's like Nineveh is going to be knocked down more than just a peg or two, and this is them being condemned post Jonah. So they've already been through their revival, and they're back to their old ways. Uh, this is one of the very, very few verses in Scripture where very negative things are in connotation with poop. There's another verse that we're going to be getting into or another couple of verses actually that we're going to be getting into when we specifically are looking at diet stuff. Um, but there's no explicit verse in scripture or in Torah that calls poop unclean. But it is generally considered that like specifically other people's poop is like makes you unclean, like it's thrown on you, like you're filthy, you're dirty, like take a bath. And then definitely like shame is associated. Um, there's Torah verses where Yahweh is telling his people like, hey, when you go outside the camp, you need to bury your poop. Uh, that is one that we're going to look at. We're also going to look at when we get into the diet section, where Ezekiel is told to cook his Ezekiel bread over manure. And it was originally told to him that he had to do it over human dung. And he's like, well, I've never, defiled myself with anything unclean like that. And he's like, okay, fine. Yahweh tells Ezekiel, okay, you don't have to do it over human dung. You can do it over cow dung because, like, I don't want you to be defiled with somebody else's poop. Um, that's another connotation in there. And then this verse are kind of like the main squeezes where, in general, like other people's poop should disgust you too, or should disgust you too. Like, ugh. So there's the general like, it's wet, not yours, don't touch it. And if you're having filth, it's a nice way of saying poo poo thrown on you, it's probably not a good thing. And it's also in the connotations of, I'll treat you with contempt. I will make you a spectacle. I mean, he talks about it earlier in this that he's going to lift the skirts over their faces, to where the other nations are going to look at your nakedness and kingdoms at your shame. So, like, very shameful connotations in this passage. Uh, and there was enough in this one that specifically, like, throw filth on you, um, that I thought this was a relatively unique, like, yes, there's other stuff going on. They have bad character actions, but there's just some je ne sais quoi about this one that it's like this kind of needs to be in a miscellaneous passage. Um, in all of these, there's not like this common thread that goes through all of these other than these are just some of the more eclectic, the more unique settings in here, and I think that is worth just not ignoring these. And that's part of why I wanted to do the miscellaneous ones before we dive into the other ones. That these verses are going to tie in other places. Um, but I could not like solid codify these in their own special category. And these, while they do touch on other things, there was just something about. So that's why I chose for these to go in the miscellaneous passage. Um, as we saw earlier, you'll see that the other stuff that is not directly translated abomination, when a lot of times it's either loathsome or unclean, or detestable, things like that, that they carry some of the same things, but there's something about them in those passages, where those other ones as well just are, they don't fit neatly into other boxes. So I just felt like those deserve the miscellaneous category. That doesn't mean that they're any less status, but these categories, I made them up anyway. I identified them, and this whole miscellaneous category was just stuff that, um, where it may have played into other things, it just didn't, 100% fit into other things. And I want to acknowledge that for what it is. I hope that in this that you're able to take that abomination spreadsheet and just use this as a good resource. And some of you guys just love getting into the weeds, and I think this miscellaneous passage section is well worth just diving into the weeds and gleaning whatever Yahweh puts on your heart, for this. And just know that not everything always cleanly fits into a box. Um, yeah, in that, just take it for what it's worth. We're going to be getting into other, some pretty heavy, sections in the coming weeks. We're going to be doing, improper worship in a couple weeks, and that one, um, it's surprising. It really is. And so I hope you guys glean from it, some of the things that I've gotten from this too. Uh, with all of that, um, I want to remind you that as we tread on some heavy topics and some heavy territories, all of this, regardless of the toes that get stepped on as we get moving, because trust me, we're going to be saying some or reading some pretty heavy things about homosexuality, which I know offends people. We're going to be touching on what the Bible has to say about our diet. And that gets a lot of people up in a tizzy, like really, really fast. Um, I would like to remind you that in addition to those things, which Yahweh spells out in Scripture, like, hey, this is what I want for your life. This is what I don't want for your life. I think he has better plans for us than what our best laid intentions of mice and men are. There are also things that we consider small and trivial, like charging interest, that Yahweh hates. Proverbs has a lot to say about things that we would consider daily actions that he calls abominations to, that our lying tongues are abominable to him. So don't think just because you're checking some boxes somewhere that you're exempt from this, because we're not. The abomination context is that it is disgusting to somebody. In this, we saw the Egyptians being disgusted by certain things. We saw Yahweh being disgusted by certain things. Uh, we should take note of what the disgust is and who it's disgusting to. So that way we are well aware of what's going on. Context matters in a lot of these things. So reading one or two verses, you're not always going to be well served. I hope the spreadsheet that I've given you is a good reference, but don't just one-off read some of these verses. Like you need to whole chapters. Go do hard things.